All right, guys. So here is our second video for the week, in which we're going to talk about the cultural consequences of conductivity. And again, if you were probably asked to brainstorm this based on what you've learned from Unit 1 so far and what you could predict from the first 4 chapters of AMSCO, you would probably get a lot of these ideas already. So let's kind of just go through them quickly. So here we first have our vocab. Oh, let me move so you can see the compass and astrolabe. Here you go. And then here's our second vocab. Have to move myself again. All right. So let's get into this chapter. So this is going to be the biggest slide, probably of the entire unit, where it talks about the religious, cultural, and technological effects of interaction, okay? So we already can infer that these ideas are going to spread through the trade systems, but what's really important is how these exist. So these belief systems that spread through the exchange network change through the process of exchange, but then how pre-existing systems spread to react to that spreading, right? That this is a conversation. These ideas are in flux. I think we have an impulse to look at even ideas like religion with a type of rigidity in which they've kind of always been away, right? And I think the basic tenets of religion have, most religions stay the same throughout their history, but there is always a reaction to what's going on, right? That people who might identify as culturally conservative and are Christian have certain opinions about contemporary issues like technology that are not things that Christians were worried about 100, 200, 400 years ago, right? So even like people who want to keep religions the same have to give new interpretations or interpret new things through the pre-existing context of their ideas, right? And that process is occurring in the post-classical world as well, right? So we're first going to talk about Buddhism, right? Buddhism comes into China through the Silk Road relatively early, like the 500. So it's not something that really starts in 1200, which is the period that we've been studying. But there are all these pre-existing religious systems that have to react to Buddhism. And so Taoism is a belief system that adherence, and in China, even in today, religion in China or belief in China is quite, I feel like, fluctuous. Like you can be a Taoist and a Confucianist. You can be a legalist, which is a term that you don't need to learn about anymore because it got cut out of WAP. You could be all of these different ideologies and accept the nuances of them. And if, in fact, if you were a member of the scholar gentry, you'd be expected to be fluent in these core ideologies of China, and probably your politics would be really complicated, like anyone else's politics are right now. But so Taoism and the parts of Taoism were really connected to Buddhism, and so a Buddhism that was affected by Taoism became known as Zen Buddhism or Chan Buddhism. Now, something that's not talked about in the other chapters yet is how who accepts Buddhism and who doesn't. And kind of a universal theme when we talk about, when we talk about the spread of religion and the relationship of universalizing religions with ethnic religions would be who finds these new ideas attractive. It'd be people who are actively losing out on the status quo before the religion comes in. So people who might be socially or economically or even politically disadvantaged might find reasons to prescribe to a new religion. And so in East Asia, that's what happens with Buddhism, that the people who are most disenfranchised find reasons to support that religion. So in Korea, the lower social class likes Buddhism, but the higher classes identify more with Neo-Confucianism. Now, Buddhism also travels across the Sea of Japan into Japan, and the indigenous animistic religion of Japan, Shinto, is like Taoism in the way of how it talks about nature. And I don't want to say they're the same thing. So they're not exactly the same thing. But what that means is that when Buddhism comes in, people connect Buddhism with Shintoism, and so that becomes a syncretic religion as well. like kind of amplifies or adapts Chan Buddhism or Chan Buddhism. So Hinduism and Buddhism spread along the trade routes of the Indian Ocean, right? You have Hindu traders, you have Buddhist traders who are from South Asia and Buddhists from South Asia or Northern South Asia. They bring their religion with them. And something I think that maybe I want to emphasize now, oh my God, the typos, guys. The typos are out of control. What is it? The development of diasporic communities. Or maybe it was in a video that I did a few years ago. That's why I can't remember if I talk about it. But one of the ways these religions spread is that Hindus from another part of the world settled in this community and have families and develop lives and welcome other members of their religion and their culture there until a diasporic community develops. So I think a really, really fascinating example to look at would be the diaspora of Han Chinese people, not in the world. Yes. 1 second. I have to pause the video because the WebKit is here. It was Samantha Martin. Shout out to Samantha Martin in the comments. I actually don't remember if I have comments in here labeled. I probably don't. I don't think you guys would ever put anything valuable in the comments. So we're talking about Hinduism, diaspora communities. These are people who travel around the world. They settled there. And then sometimes people prescribe to the religions, right? Sometimes that does happen, like they convert. That would happen more in Buddhism than Hinduism. So Shivjaya would be a Hindu state. That's a state that eventually adopts Hinduism as its religion. Mahapajit would be a Buddhist state. Sinhala was Buddhist as well. Sinhala is in modern-day Sri Lanka. Also was known for a period of time as Ceylon during the British Empire. And then eventually Buddhist monks in Sinhala advised monarchs. So you have a political manifestation through the spread of trade and things like that. The Khmer, which are also known as the Angkor Kingdom, were in modern-day Cambodia, and they really show the waves and ebbs and flow. The very famous palace that Ade had as their quiz in 1-1 and 1-2 quiz was Angkor Wat, which is a palace that has some Hindu iconography, but when the state turned to Buddhism, they kind of added some Buddhism stuff, and sometimes those ideas are compatible, so some of the Hindu art stayed, and that's a good example of like what's going on in Southeast Asia as a consequence of trade. Islam, these are things that I've probably harped on a ton. You're probably sick of me talking about. But you have Swahili coming to in East Africa. Indian Ocean trade brings Islam through the diasporic communities, and then the conversion of people through it being productive. Like they like the idea. These might be people who are socially disadvantaged in urban areas. African leaders go on the Hajj along the East African coast. It's way easier for them than it was for Mansa Musa. Timbuktu becomes the center of Islamic interpretation. That ways of understanding Islam for Muslims improves as a consequence of Islam coming to Africa. Right? So that's something that's really important, that how an Arab practices Islam is somewhat influenced by the work of Islamic scholars in Timbuktu. And so it kind of globalizes or continentalizes the religion. In South Asia, you guys have done an activity about this, but low-caste Hindus were attracted to this idea. Urdu is a fusion of Arabic and Persian with South Asian languages that's mostly spoken in modern-day Pakistan, but also in northern India, as well as parts of eastern India, because they kind of spread across northern India. Java is a part of Indonesia that becomes Islamic, and what's interesting about Java, kind of a cool part of Javanese culture is a type of theater called shadow puppetry. And eventually, this predates Islam, but shadow puppetry eventually is used by the Javanese to tell the story of Islam, or indigenous stories to Java are Islamized in this process, right? And I think something to talk about a little bit, is this idea of Islamic perceptions of objective art, which is more of a holdover from Arabic culture. Certain cultures had objective art, which is when I say objective art, I'm not saying art that's objectively good or bad. Objective art is something that tries to portray the world, the physical world. And Arabic culture, even before Islam, had these prohibitions against trying to portray the world, and then that became a part of Islamic culture, and it's kind of profane to try to create something because that's what God did. He created people in their image and stuff like that. So with Javanese or even Persian culture, they're fine with objective art. So like that's kind of like a kind of an interesting permutation of Islam in other cultures as well. Get off me. Okay. So next thing to talk about would be the technology and science, right? So we have the Greek text that can translate to Arabic and then back into European languages that kind of become the incubators of the Enlightenment. Math travels from where it starts to others because math is a very practical tool. And so the math that was like really beneficial, specifically in making exchange more efficient and easier to understand, spreads as a consequence of trade because people are like, hey, how'd you do that? Oh, I did it this way. Oh, that's cool. Compound addition, which is not a thing probably, but algebra is something that comes out of the trade route. And I think most of you would be in geometry right now. And that's the Greeks' fault, Euclid's fault. But algebra last year, that was the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade route's fault. Seafaring is something that technologically is expedited as well that AMSCO spends a lot of time focusing on. So technology like the lateen sail, which allow you to move more efficiently against a headwind when the wind is blowing against your sail. I got to put that away. I'm sorry. A stern rudder enables a ship to be more maneuverable, specifically through more treacherous areas. So what were historically dangerous routes became less dangerous. The astrolabe enables you to kind of map where you are based on celestial bodies, mainly the stars, but you got the planets too. And the magnetic compass, you guys had Shark Tank. I don't need to speak too much about that. Hangzhou is a city that's pretty big in China even today, I'm pretty sure. Is a big element of Unit 2 emphasizes urbanization as a consequence of exchange. Because these cities had things that people wanted, people moved to those cities. And that's not unique to one part of the world. In fact, it is essential to the story of Period 1, of what is driving urbanization. That urbanization is a process that begins kind of the moment humans settle down and accelerates into industrialization. But why people move during industrialization in the 1800s is very different than now. But cities like Novgorod and Timbuktu and Calicut, all are growing because of trade. Samarkand and Kashgar are places that you guys have learned about. Or we just, you just had on the quiz. If you haven't taken the quiz yet, I guess, cities, nomads attack cities like Kashgar because they're so attractive, because they have so much stuff to take. Constantinople was sacked in that Fourth Crusade you learned about in 1.6. So cities become targets for people to conquer for the benefit of the conqueror. The Crusades make Europe more culturally and religiously and technologically interconnected, right? European Christians connect with Middle Eastern Christians as the example, but also the interconnectedness. The Black Death arrives and kills a bunch of Europe, as much as 3/4 of Europe, but probably about half of Europe and stuff like that. The new ideas that come through all these innovations also challenge the authority of the Catholic Church, lead to the Renaissance, which leads to humanism, which leads to, the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution that are integral to the development of industrialization, that this is a continuity with how the world is the way that it is today. And our final slide talks about our homies, Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, and Marjorie Kemp. These people are important because they give us a human perspective on these networks of exchange. Marco Polo had a somewhat cool TV show made about him in Netflix. The first season is a banger. The second season, there was no second season. The first season is all you need to watch. Well, you shouldn't watch it either yet when you're older. Watch it when you're older. But Marco Polo was an Italian from Venice. He travels along the Silk Road. He sees things. He writes them down. He eventually ends up in China during Yuan Dynasty China. He meets Kublai Khan. I don't think he actually meets Kublai Khan, but he goes to the court of Kublai Khan. He sees Kublai Khan for sure. I don't know if Kublai Khan really cares about him. He talks a lot about the cities because he spends so much time in the cities, and he does some ethnography. ethnography, and like a guy who doesn't know the language of the people around him, he makes observations from the limited perspective that he has, right? This is a European dude who understands European culture and sees people doing things that are not how Europeans would do things, and he writes that stuff down, right? And these observations make people really interested in the rest of the world and is immensely informative to how Europeans see East Asia in the future, right? It doesn't become the foundation of that, but it does become really important. Ibn Battuta is another homie who is someone who's a Muslim, and he doesn't travel as a merchant. He travels because he is just someone who's interested in learning and seeing the world. He sees most of Asian Islam, most of Asian Dar al-Islam, as well as West Africa over a 30-year period. And what's really important about him is he has things to say about how people were living, but it's rooted deeply in his religious experience and his religious perspective. So it's an Islamic-centric text. Marjorie Kemp is an English woman who also worked as a mystic. She had a lot of children. I believe Amsco said 14 children. So, that was a lot of work, it sounds like. Not busy boy levels like Genghis Khan, but that really shaped how you see the world. And she traveled, though, throughout Christendom, mainly as a pilgrim. So she has that stuff. So, like, there's another individual. I'm pretty sure Amsco included her because she's kind of like an Ibn Battuta, but a lady and Christian. Like, that's the gist of it. So that is our video on this one. It's going to be the longest video probably. We have one more kind of note space chapter and one more kind of final review chapter. So see you guys in the next video.